Have you ever jumped from the roof of a 2-story building? It hurts, especially when you're unable to pull off a proper landing. I had to do this once in order to save my own life. Let me take you back to when I was 18 to 19 years old. I'm 26 now. My boyfriend at the time was extremely abusive, but being scared, naive, and believing that he loved me and would change, I stayed with him. We had several problems. We abused substances together, which was one of the reasons why I believed we really loved each other. Just the drugs were making us act a way we never had before towards each other. We had trust issues, we were desperately codependent, were on and off constantly, and he had a problem with not being able to keep his hands to himself in his fits of rage. I was very depressed. My family and friends didn't want anything to do with me for obvious reasons, but he made it seem like I couldn't have friends anyway or even talk to anyone without his knowledge. He would check my phone when I slept. He would interrogate me. When I had a job, I worked in a place that had horrible phone reception. If I didn't return his text fast enough, or if the text didn't add up because of the reception and the fact that he wouldn't receive my text in order, he accused me of texting someone else I was cheating on him with and would threaten me. He would insult me, tell me he knew I would never leave him because I wouldn't be able to get anyone better than him. He called me stupid, ugly, all sorts of terrible names. I never even cheated on him. He would lie to me about sleeping with other women just to hurt me and see me cry. Then he would physically abuse me, slap, choke to the point that I thought he was going to knock me out or worse. The worst one of all, however, was this one time we were hanging out at a park, partaking in things we probably shouldn't have in public. I won't go into too much detail because I'm afraid of him seeing this, and I've been scared for years that he would find me. I literally have nightmares about him finding out where I live and showing up at my house. I wake up drenched in sweat, and I'm actually sweating typing this right now. So we're at the park, and for some reason to this day I still can't fathom why, he starts hurting himself right in front of me. I freak out and tell him I'm going to call an ambulance for his own safety, and he just takes off running. About 10 minutes later, a police car and paramedic shows up, and he's nowhere to be found. I told them the general direction he ran in and apologized for wasting their time. Maybe about 20 minutes later, he calls me. I answer, and he's just screaming at me. "Why would you call the cops on me?" I apologized profusely, trying to explain through my tears that I was deeply concerned for his safety and that I hadn't actually called the police, that I had called an ambulance and didn't know the police would also show up. I'm crying, begging him to tell me where he is. He says he's on the roof of a building and gives me cross streets to his location. I stupidly meet up with him. I climb up the building onto the roof. The sun has gone down and it's dark at this point. We just start talking and he's acting like everything is normal. I can't remember what we're actually talking about, but I remember thinking how nice it was to actually just have a conversation with him without yelling insults or accusations. Then, all of a sudden, he pounces on me. I'm on my back and his knees are digging into my shoulders, holding my arms down. His eyes look crazy and soulless. Then he starts slapping me in the face. I later find out that one particular slap was so hard he gave me a black eye. He's screaming at me. I can't remember what all he said, but I know he was calling me names, accusing me of things I never did. Then he starts punching my legs and telling me that he's gonna have his way with me. My back is hurting from the stucco roof and it's bleeding through my shirt. I think he choked me too, but I can't remember. I seriously thought that I was about to die. Then I had finally went into survival mode. I'm sobbing and pleading with him. "If you really love me, why are you doing this? I never even did anything to you. If you truly love me, you'll just stop. Please." As soon as I say this, it's like flipping a switch. His eyes and demeanor change, and he gets off of me. He starts apologizing, and as soon as he turns his back, I jump off the roof. I landed horribly, and I hear him from the rooftop yelling. At this time, I'm thinking I broke my back and feet, and I'm lying in a crumpled heap in an alleyway. I hear him coming down, and I'm thinking how I need to get to the street and scream for help. He's getting closer, trying to help me up, and while dragging myself army style to the road, I scream as loud as I can for him to not touch me, You just tried to kill me." I see a man on the sidewalk across the street. I yell to him to please help and call the police. I'm guessing he did. I think I kind of blacked out at this point, but I remember seeing my ex run off with my purse in his hands. I went to the hospital and the police caught him a couple of hours later, and from what I heard, he put up a pretty good fight with them. It's been so long now that this story feels like a bad dream. I can't believe this actually happened, but I am grateful I survived. Needless to say, I've been clean for several years. I have my family, friends, and life back. I am married now to a wonderful man who would never even think of hurting me. We have a couple of children, and I love my life. To anyone out there in an abusive relationship, please, get out while you can. Nothing is worth risking your life every day with a lunatic, and there is someone out there who will love you and not take you for granted. You're worth so much more. This happened a few years back when I had just gotten hired at the local grocery store in my city. I was 16 at the time and definitely looked my age, if not younger. It's also important to mention that I'm quite a shy person as is, especially back then at my new workplace. I had been working there for a while when our store hired a new cashier. For this story, I'll call him Joseph. Overall, Joseph seemed pretty nice. He was always waving hello to everyone, greeting everyone at the start of his shift. Just fit in pretty well and seemed like a fairly normal guy trying his best to befriend his coworkers. After a few months of working there, Joseph started trying to talk to me more frequently. This didn't seem weird, as cashiers tend to get close to anyone that they frequently work the same hours as. It's always nice to have someone to have short conversations with when the store gets quiet. It did escalate pretty quickly, with him going out of his way to talk to me about any chance he got, but again, he was fairly new and I assumed he was just being friendly. This changed one day as I'm getting off of work and he approached me as I was exiting the store and asked if I would like to get coffee with him. I was caught extremely off guard by this, and due to being shy and an anxious person, I stammered out a quick, yeah, sure. Immediately regretting this in my head as I had zero attraction to Joseph, before I quickly ran out of the store to where my parents were waiting to pick me up. That day when I got home, I searched his profile on Facebook to see if I could find out more about him. It turns out Joseph wasn't actually as young as I assumed he was. He was 26 years old at this time. At this point, I will also mention that it was a known fact between all cashiers that me and a handful of other cashiers were all in high school. So knowing that I wasn't going to entertain the idea of coffee with him, the next day at work when I saw him, I told him that I wouldn't be able to get coffee with him as the age difference was too much for me. Unfortunately, this didn't seem to deter Joseph, who simply replied, "Does age matter to you? It doesn't matter to me." I replied with a quick, "Well, when you're almost 30 and I'm in high school, it matters a bit." This comment seemed to go unnoticed as he stated how he would wait for me and how he could make me happy. This obviously creeped me out, and from then on I began to avoid Joseph as best as I could. However, he began to become very persistent. Every single shift I had, he either happened to be working already or would go through my till to buy a single item and continue to pester me for a date, asking me almost daily, "Have you changed your mind?" and telling me that he wasn't giving up. This may not seem like much for those reading, but being harassed daily by an older man in an environment where you were supposed to be safe was terrifying for me. I admit, if this had taken place now, I would have totally gone to HR or my manager and told them about the situation, but as a 16-year-old girl working her first job, I feared that I was overreacting. Eventually, after at least a couple of months of honestly being scared to go to work, I confided in a friend that I worked with that it was happening. This friend happened to be a huge 6-foot-tall man who said that he would talk to Joseph about his creepy behavior. Around the same time, I also told one of Joseph's closer friends at our workplace about his behavior and how it was upsetting me. And around this time, Joseph began to leave me alone, shortly after leaving the store entirely. I actually began to forget all about this until a year or so ago after it all happened when I got a message from an old work friend who I don't typically talk to. Her message simply stated, "Did you see this?" and had a link below. The link was a mugshot from the Crime Stoppers unit in our town, a mugshot of Joseph, underneath which it said that there was a province-wide warrant out for his arrest for the charges of possession and distribution of illicit images containing children. I don't know what I avoided by not going out for coffee with him, and I can't say with certainty that anything would have happened, but boy am I glad my warning bells went off when they did. What I'm sharing may not be as serious as many of the other stories I've seen, but one recent incident in particular has led me to think I should reach out to someone for advice. I'm a 24-year-old female that has just lost my job as a personal assistant to a mid-level executive in the fashion industry. My termination came so quickly I was unable to find another job in the same line of work before my rent came due. Desperation drove me to apply for a waitress job at a small family restaurant near my apartment. Despite having no prior history waiting tables, I got the job. I guess the owners were as desperate as I was at that moment. My first shift was on a Monday afternoon, and I soon came to realize I enjoyed the work. Most of the customers were regulars. They were very kind and understanding of my hiccups and tipped well. It didn't take long for me to catch on, and I was allowed to take as many shifts as I wanted. Before I knew it, I'd got my bills paid for the month and even had a little left over for a celebratory bottle of wine. As I write this, I've worked at the restaurant for 3 months and almost every minute on the clock has been a blast. Crazy, right? Yeah, I know it's not a sentence I'd ever expected to say when I agreed to take the job. At first, my intention was to stay only long enough to get another fashion-related job, but finding out I was good at the table waiting thing has greatly increased my self-esteem. Not to mention, the money is good. I can't say I had any complaints about the job until a few weeks ago. On a late Sunday evening, one of the regulars appeared to have formed a crush on me. I wasn't aware of it at the time, or even aware of him until I waited on him the following lunch shift. He had been on an extended vacation, and now that I've met him, I wish he would have stayed where he was. The customer in question is a 64-year-old gentleman who recently retired from the drilling industry. Not exactly my type, I must say, and a bit too old for me. My introduction to him wasn't any more strange than any of the other regulars. However, the way in which he stared at me the entire time made me nervous. Then he left me a $100 tip on a $6.50 tab. My initial reaction was one of joy, but as I dwelled upon it, I became uncomfortable with taking it. His return on that Thursday afternoon escalated my discomfort to an entire new level. I attempted to wait on him, as he was just another customer, but his reasons behind the massive tip soon became obvious. When I took his drink order, he asked me if I appreciated my large tip. This gave me the opportunity to tell him I wasn't comfortable taking a tip that large, but he interrupted me before I had the chance and hinted that I was now beholden to go on a date with him. The idea disarmed me. I wasn't sure that he meant what I thought, but just to be safe, I returned the $100 bill to him. The last thing I wanted to be seen as was some form of prostitute. When he was young, some women who waited tables may have sold themselves, but this girl is no whore. When I handed the bill back to him, a look of shock appeared on his face, soon followed by a big smile. All he could say was, "I've never seen a woman turn down a $100 bill. Now I see how it's gonna be." This reaction confused me. It was exactly the opposite of what I'd hoped for. I expected him to get mad, or at least get that I wasn't for sale. Him thinking I was playing hard to get scared me a little. However, I did consider that maybe I was perhaps misunderstanding what he meant. Our age gap could be making me misconstrue his intentions. It was possible he was only trying to show his appreciation for my services. For the remainder of his time in the restaurant that day, I said very little to him, and he met me with his usual fawning gaze. Once he left, a load of relief was lifted from my shoulders. It was short-lived, however, when I returned to the table and saw the $100 bill sitting there. This was beginning to look like some type of game he was playing with me. I had the impression that once I accepted that tip, I would be accepting of much more in his mind. This brings us up to a few days ago, when he was once again seated in my section. Before I could do anything, I had to make it clear that I could not accept that $100 tip. Once again, I handed it back to him and told him that I was in a long-term relationship and could not go out with him, even once. My speech didn't appear to make a dent in his facade. He replied by saying that he had no idea what I was talking about, but as he said it, a sly, childish grin was pasted on his face. I was starting to become angry at the way he was acting and stormed off to get his drink. By the time I made it back, something had very much changed in his demeanor. The usual doting and loving eyes had disappeared and been replaced by a simmering fury I would have never expected to come from him. His grin was no longer there. His face had become expressionless and cold. When I noticed this change, a jolt of fear shot through me. From that point, nothing else was said between us. One thing had not changed, however. When I returned to the table, the $100 bill was sitting there, but it was now joined by a small folded piece of paper. I unfolded it and saw that it was a brief handwritten note. It simply read, "It would benefit you to accept this." A shiver tore through me. I was almost positive he didn't intend this to be friendly. Although it wasn't necessarily threatening sounding, his attitude change gave me the impression it was a helpful hint. The entire predicament has made me confused and unsure of how to move forward. On one hand, the gentleman has not come out and clearly threatened me in any way. Up until our last interaction, he was nothing but happy and kind towards me. He also has never actually claimed to want to go on a date with me. As a matter of fact, he denied that this was his desire when I confronted him about it. To top it all off, I don't know one waitress who would dare turn down a $100 tip and see it as anything other than a show of thanks for good service. When it comes to the change of personality, for all I am aware, something terrible could have occurred while I had gone getting his drink. It may have zero to do with me. On the other, however, his instance that I accept the large tip clearly makes me uncomfortable. He has to be able to see this. Continuing to insist I accept it should be a bad sign. The split-second change in his attitude after I told him I was not interested was more than likely connected, even if it was not. The speed at which he could become so different and the darkness of his eyes would certainly give anyone pause. As if it even needs to be said, putting the tip and the ominously written note together with the very unsettling interaction we had just had, I am of the almost 100% belief that I was being threatened. Nevertheless, even after writing this, I am completely at my wit's end and have no idea of how to proceed. This gentleman is a long-time customer of the restaurant, and up until a few days ago, I've had nothing but positive, if not slightly difficult, interactions with him. Since my grandparents had passed away before I was born, I've spent very little time with people of his age, and I'm afraid I have mistaken harmless flirting with that of a predator. Therefore, I put this to you. What action do you think I should take next? Am I being an oversensitive snowflake, or do you see trouble in my future? Any feedback will be taken into account and considered. I definitely wouldn't be putting myself out like this if I didn't feel I may be in trouble. I need help, and I need it now.